Hello and welcome back to WonderTour. We are in episode 138. This is our second episode on the Christopher Nolan Batman movie, The Dark Knight. But this is also our first episode in our series on courage. So we've just wrapped up our series on game theory with the first half of this movie talking about how Batman does information gathering to improve his understanding of the world and how he starts to think about crafting the narrative as his approach to counteracting the Joker's narrative-based approach. From a courage standpoint, though, what we see is that the real challenge is to decide when and how to intervene and what of yourself you're willing to give up in the process. So we're going to start right off with a tough question here. I'm going to ask you, Drew. In The Dark Knight, is Bruce Wayne as Batman or Harvey Dent, eventually Two-Face? Which one of them is more courageous when we start this movie out?
Okay, so there's a number of different things that come to mind when you bring up courage in this moment. We'll get to a definition of courage here in a second, but first off, I love the Harvey Dent arc here, right? Because from the beginning, you're getting all this foreshadowing, like every single line, both said to Harvey and that Harvey says is foreshadowing Two-Face from the beginning of this movie.
Right.
So we know that he's a conflicted character, despite the fact that he's being presented as a very unified character. And of course, anybody who knows who Two-Face is before the movie also knows that. But either way, this setup of Harvey as this pristine character who can do no wrong, who is going to be the face of hope for Gotham, is great because it is the feel-good story that we want, right? That somebody is finally going to stand up to all of these thugs, this mob who has been oppressing the city. And we want somebody with a face to do that, not just Batman. We want what Batman did in Batman Begins to be able to continue to take hold in other people as well. The challenge is, right, that Harvey, the courage that he shows is there's a lot of bravado in it. You know, we have the moment where Batman just says that he's going to reveal who he is in order to succumb to the Joker's scheme so that no more people die. And yet, when it comes time to do it, Harvey's there at the press box about to make the announcement, and he's like, I'm Batman. Of course, big I am Spartacus vibes.
Yes, yes.
And it's great, though, because in a way, we actually like that he did that because it showed that he has a trust in something bigger than himself. He's actually willing to put himself in handcuffs and trust that other people are going to do the right thing in order to protect him in Gotham. Brilliant. The challenge is that when that eventual bravado, that bravery that he shows, reaches its testing point, it seems to falter, doesn't it? Because he's able to hold this brave face up until the end in the moment that he's there with Rachel and one of them's going to die, just until he doesn't, basically. And when he wakes up in the hospital bed, the conflict has overcome him. And then we see that built upon now, and we see Batman. And Batman, who has kind of been a little bit conflicted throughout the entire movie, he's doing a lot of things for Rachel and for his relationship with Rachel, while also doing them for Gotham. You know, he does a lot of things that take a lot of courage, but now he's going to face his test. So now let's talk about the definition of courage here. And the definition of courage we're going to bring is from C.S. Lewis, a man who had a lot of great definitions of these leadership superpowers that we love. So as we introduce the leadership superpower of courage, Lewis said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point, which means at the point of highest reality.
Okay, I love this. So let's, before we get to the testing of the courage, I want to talk a little bit about the framing of this, right? So we see at the beginning of the movie, you could absolutely argue that Harvey is more courageous. They're both crusading against the mob in a city where that is a highly perilous proposition, right? But Bruce is doing it without telling anybody who he actually is, so nobody knows where he actually lives as Batman. And he's doing it from inside an armored suit and an armored car with a whole bunch of gadgets, right? And he's a billionaire who has a lot of resources to draw upon to put himself in a position to succeed. Harvey doesn't have any of those things. Harvey is a lawyer. He's a DA who's standing up in front of the entire world and say that I personally am taking on the mob, and I have to do it only with arguing in courtrooms. only with gathering evidence with a highly corrupted police force. He knows perfectly well that he doesn't have a lot of allies, right? He has, he has Rachel, who he trusts both as a professional colleague and as a partner, right? But he doesn't have a lot else going for him. So on the face of it, he's doing the more courageous thing. Like he's letting the mob know who he is and that he's their enemy, and he's going straight after them, and he's telling everybody that he's going to do it. And what we see is he's got this incredible charisma. He's got the movie star looks. He's Gotham's White Knight, but he also has this coin flipping trick where he always wins, right? He has this curated view of the world that I always win. He kind of believes his own narrative, right? He's got a great narrative and he's so good at it. He's so sincere and he's working so hard at it that everybody else buys in. Like Bruce Wayne is like, yeah, he's the best of us. He's the one that should be the hero, right? Gordon buys into him, the mayor buys into him, everybody's like, oh yeah, this is the person we should trust. But that view of the world, that I always win, that I'm gonna go up against the worst people in the world and none of them are gonna punch me back in a way that I can't handle, right? That does eventually fail, right? Like you said, when he gets to the real testing point, when he gets to the point where the world kicks back, not just by like fighting him in court or, trying to take his life, but actually like blowing up buildings and hospitals and murdering the woman he loves and like all this stuff, like, and scarring him horribly. He can't process that, right? None of us could. Like normal human beings would absolutely break in that moment and would then believe that the world is a terrible and capricious and cruel and evil place, right? That would be a completely reasonable reaction to things.
He's not able to
experience that
submit
he has, right?
his revenge. That's it. He has to hold on to his own revenge instead of submitting it for the greater good.
Right. And yeah, and he just can't. He breaks in his conception of the world. He is trying to change the world to be a place that has more good things in it, and he gives up on that. He's like, that can't be done. That's not actually the world I live in. And that's the biggest difference between him and Bruce Wayne. Is Bruce Wayne is getting kicked in the head over and over and over again, and has already from day zero, as in the parents' death scene that we've seen in 7 different movies, right? But he's lost things over and over again. By this point, he's lost Wayne Manor and he's lost Rachel, and he has very little personal attachments left. But he keeps believing that he can change the world, right? He keeps coming back.
Not only that, when he faces his test, which we'll talk about here in our mountaintop moment, when he faces his test, he not only is able to pass the test by keeping his integrity, which is one of his virtues or leadership superpowers, right? When his integrity reaches its testing point, will he kill somebody or will he not? Will he stoop to the level of chaos in the Joker? He passes that test. But not only that, he also sacrifices the perceived view of his integrity to the public, which lets you know that he's not doing it for any self-involved reason. Because everybody's going to think
he's not going to get any reward out of this.
Low integrity, exactly, and yet he continues to be a person of high integrity. And to me, that is what courage is all about.
Yeah. All right. I really want to talk about integrity, but let's first do the intro. Hi, I'm Brian Nutwell.
And I'm Drew Perot.
And we are in a journey to become better leaders, to lead wisely by touring fantastic worlds and inspiring lore, by going on this Wonder Tour.
We connect leadership concepts to story contexts because it sticks to our brains better. You can find out more at WonderTourPodcast.com. Also on WonderTourPodcast.com, you can see some great Wonder Tour merch like what Brian is modeling right now for us.
So integrity. So I love the framing of this. Comic books let us do these ridiculous, exaggerated characterizations of people. But I love the sense that we kind of all have this duality, right? The dark and light sides of our personality, or the dark and light sides of the force. Like that's a classic story framing, right? Where Harvey Dent starts off as like, oh, I'm only the light side. I always win and I'm purely good and I'm incorruptible and I don't possibly have any dark within me. Right. And then a variety of terrible things happen to him, including he gets scarred to visually have both light and dark. And he really doesn't process that well. Right. Like he interprets the presence of both light and dark to mean that the world is just terrible and capricious and random. Right. Okay. Now we're going to decide if people live and die by flipping coins. right? Right. Like he's bought into this narrative, right? Whereas Bruce, as Batman, has always held those things in tension, right? He's always had the I'm a playboy billionaire and also I'm beating up scumbags in my suit in the dark. And I'm also always losing things and I'm also always uncomfortable. Like he's always held those things in tension. Like he's recognized that that's just kind of how it goes and that you keep fighting the good fight anyway.
Yeah, and put another way, Brian, like you were saying, he has recognized that any hope that he is providing, any good things that he brings to Gotham come at a cost.
Right. And he just keeps paying that cost over and over again. Right. So that brings us to our mountaintop moment in this movie, which I think, of course, we have to get there in this movie with the conversation about courage. We kind of have to land right at the very end of the movie, even after the Joker has been captured and hung out to dry for the SWAT team. Right. We have a tableau with Batman shows up while Jim Gordon's family is being threatened by Harvey Dent, who is now Two-Face. And there's quite a bit of monologuing about worldviews. So take us into our mountaintop.
Yeah, our mountaintop has to be kind of the mountaintop moment of the entire movie. Right at the end with Two-Face, we have Two-Face and he's got Barbara Gordon and he's got the Gordon's kids. And really, in this way, Gordon is actually also having one of his virtues pushed to the testing point. And Gordon's virtue that's being pushed to the testing point, I would argue, is love. And it's kind of been pushed to the testing point throughout the entire movie. So we see Gordon, who's going to show courage in this moment to just continue to be there, to continue to, say and do the things that he can do in that moment. But the critical point here, though, is that we have this great chiaroscuro, right? Light coming down on one side of Two-Face's face, and we can't see the other side of his face. And he's, like you said, he's kind of waxing poetic about a little bit idealistic, right? That's the light side of Two-Face, is the ideal that good things can happen and that love is real and all of these things. But then, of course, there's the reality that these things can be taken away from you. And he's upset that these things have been taken away from him and thinks that everybody, generally has to pay that toll in a random sense. But the moment that's great really is that Batman shows up here, and he shows up at the last minute, of course, to save Gordon, repaying Gordon for the favor when Gordon saves him earlier in the movie.
Yep.
And the first thing that happens is Two-Face flips the coin, and he flips the coin for Batman and shoots him. We see Batman crumble to the ground, and then Two-Face Two-Face then flips the coin for himself, and then he flips the coin for the kid because he's psychotic at this point. We see Batman lunge from the shadows once more, taking Two-Face down the vent to save the kid. But what's really important to me after the fact, Brian, when we have the conversation with Gordon and Batman discussing what do we do from here.
So the thing that I love about Two-Face's monologue, right, is the thing about being fair. And he's interpreted that the world is capricious and unfair and cruel. And the way that he's trying to resolve that in his head is, okay, I will personally take revenge for that fact by making the world capricious and unfair and cruel for other people because that would be fair. Right? Like, oh, it would be fair if everybody else that was involved in my suffering also suffers in exactly the same way. Right? So he's trying to make it symmetrical. Like he's trying to make it make sense in a really messed up way. Right? Because he can't process the fact that a bad thing just happened to him. Like it's got to be about him. It's got to be about, if a bad thing happened to me, it's going to be somebody's fault and I'm going to punish those people. Right? And that's the big difference between, so he says that, and then at the end, Bruce and Gordon are talking about how, Harvey Dent's fallen from grace and everything. And what Bruce says is like, we actually can't let that be the narrative. We can't say, well, there's 5 people who are killed, including 2 of them are police officers and yada, yada. He's like, okay, well, we're just going to blame Batman for that stuff. Right. Like I'll take that and they'll chase me and they'll hunt me down with the dogs and they'll be mad at me. And then I will, my image will get worse as a symbol. I will become more of the vigilante, more of the, despised figure by the police and by everybody else. But the payoff for that is we will let this image of Harvey Dent, the Crusader, who's now passed away, we can keep that image clean as a symbol of hope, of like, oh, there were people that were fighting for us and we should continue along that path. Like we should sustain that narrative. So going back to what we talked about at narrative on the last episode, right, is that they decide to take control of the narrative. But the way Bruce does that is by not making it about himself, by not making it that it has to be fair to him personally, by not making it that he has to suffer less, but actually about the opposite of all those things. Like his life is just getting measurably worse. And again, none of us are probably this courageous. None of us probably have this much character. None of us are ever hopefully going to be in anything remotely resembling this situation, right? This is a character who on the face of it could be a billionaire hanging out on the yacht with the Russian ballet if he wanted to. And he's choosing to do this instead because he believes in this change that he wants to make in the world. But they take command of the narrative at personal expense, certainly at Bruce's personal expense, because he's got the courage to take it on himself.
Yeah, I agree that the dichotomy between him and Two-Face is meant to be extremely apparent there, that Two-Face is, like you said, taking the unfairness of the world, and he is prescribing a solution that he is going to dole out to people, basically. That's his resolution. That's how he's going to continue to be okay with living. On the other hand, Bruce, who also lost Rachel, who he loved, they both loved Rachel, they both lost Rachel. Bruce actually, you could argue it was worse for him because he thought he was going to save Rachel, and he showed up to save Two-Face instead. He completely reframes that. And instead of trying to make the world pay, to make the Joker pay, to make Harvey pay, to make somebody pay for it, basically, he says, I don't, he's the one who's innocent in the situation, basically, Bruce is. And he's like, you know what? I'm the innocent one, but let me pay. And like you said, Brian, it's not going to be easy for us to say we're going to be in that exact situation, but we are going to be in many different versions of that situation in our lives. We're going to have the opportunity to choose to forgive somebody when the obvious thing to do is exact a cost and tear down their character and their brand and everything else. Or we're going to have an opportunity to say, well, that person deserves to pay anyway. We should just blow up the boat of criminals, right?
Yeah. Right. And we see that, we see a lot of instances of courage at the end of this movie. We didn't even really talk much about Jim Gordon, but you could talk about, of all these people, he's probably displaying the most consistent, quiet courage because he's in harm's way all the time. He knows that most of the people around him are not trustworthy. He knows that most of the people in the city, are not on his side. Right. And he doesn't have superpowers and he's not incredibly charismatic. Most of us would aspire to be that, right? Just to be somebody in the middle of a flawed system, trying to do the right thing over and over and over again and trying to find the high quality people to do it with. Like that's probably the best role model in this movie. I'm not going to be Batman. I'm not going to ever be Bruce
sacrifice his
Wayne,
virtues, right? He never
Right.
sacrifices his virtues. He'll stick with it even if it costs him.
Right. Yeah. And it causes suffering for his family, and it causes, it's everything. People that he trusts betray him, but he just keeps going. So he's like the realistic version of what Bruce is showing, right? And Bruce is the symbolic version of it. But I love that Harvey's reaction to being dissatisfied with the state of the world, to this really terrible shock, right, is to reflect the world back at itself. Okay, if the world is that terrible, then I'm just going to be that. I'll be an agent of the world being that way. Where Bruce's reaction is not. Bruce's reaction is, if the world's that terrible, then I'm going to take more and more of it upon me so that it's not on anybody else, so that the world is a little bit less that way. And Gordon's the same way, right? Gordon takes this on himself. He's got to hold all this stuff inside too. But that idea that despite the fact that these guys are both wrong, right? They both fail. They both don't understand what's going on at the beginning of the movie. Lots of people get hurt. Lots of things don't go well despite their best efforts. They kind of give themselves permission to fail, to be wrong, and to just keep going, but to keep insisting on changing the world for the better. And Harvey doesn't give himself permission to be wrong. He doesn't give himself permission to fail, and he stops insisting on changing the world and starts just embracing the general crappiness of it.
Yeah, and that to me is the key takeaway here. Because if you're anything like me, then you're not perfect, right? If you're perfect, then maybe you can just bear the weight of all of this stuff and you can just handle it. But
Right.
if you're not, then what do we have to offer ourselves, right? And it's giving yourself permission to fail and not have that failure become shame, become a condemnation on your character to the point where you let that drag you down. because that's what we see happen to Harvey. His failure drags him down. His failure changes his character. Where Batman, sure, he makes a mistake, but he picks himself back up, which is, once again, one of the main themes that was actually introduced to us at the beginning of this whole trilogy. What do we do when we fall, Bruce? Right? We pick ourselves back up. That's the way that it works. And that's what Batman does here. And in a way, that breaks through the crappiness of the world. It breaks through the evil of the world because you're able to still hold up this ideal of hope, this ideal of a better world, and you're able to still reconcile it then with where we're at today, where things are broken and things suck. But the skeleton key is to be willing to sacrifice, to be willing to forgive, to be willing to pay the cost. And oh, by the way, somehow that seems to make an impact on the people around you, because what Batman does here, despite the fact that at first the public is going to hate him, right, as we find out in The Dark Knight Rises, eventually the symbol of the bat becomes the symbol for hope for Gotham. It's what leads Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, Gordon's character, other characters to continuously stand up, right? So that when Batman is gone, as we always talk about when we talk about Batman, we are all Batman.
Right, right. And I love that. This is a real thing in leadership, even of a small organization, right? Even if you're a small cog in a big machine, you're a mid-level manager, you're a team leader, something like that. Like at some point, there's going to be something wrong with the world, and the people who work for you are going to think it's your fault, right? When you had nothing to do with creating it, you have no ability to solve it, but it's just going to be a crappy thing in the world, and you're the boss, you're the person that has to tell them that the thing is wrong in the world, and that this is what. And that's a real thing, right? That's not the I'm going to get punched in the face and fall off a building courage, right? That's just the leadership courage of like, it's not about me. I can take people being mad at me for the state of the world, and I can still keep trying to make the world better. And I could just be honest about what I'm doing, but also I can continue crafting the narrative of like, this is the thing that we're trying to do. This is why we're trying to do it. This is where we're going. These are the things that people need to see to believe in our story, to believe in our narrative, to believe in our journey. Again, hopefully we're not in the position where we have to be taking blame for murders as part of our leadership journey. But the idea that there are things that have gone poorly that are going to land on your shoulders through no fault of your own, because that is the best way for the team to move forward, that's a real thing. That happens.
Yeah. And we should expect that, even because when we're trying to change the world, when we are trying to be transformative leaders, then we're going to see that. The world is going to snap back after we push it in one direction. And when it snaps back, it's really going to be how do we respond to that snapback? Because it's easy to say, okay, I ran up against a constraint. I guess the world isn't ready to transform. I guess this person I'm mentoring isn't ready to transform, whatever it is. Or we can pick ourselves back up and say, okay, what different options do I have? What new information do I have? How can I continue to work towards the goal while taking that information that I just learned and reflecting on it?
Right. The courage element of that is being willing to stand up and say like, yep, we screwed up. That was my fault. Like, and not just like, oh, we had bad data for our model and now we collected more data and our model's better. But like, no, we still have this same intention. We didn't do the right thing this last time. This is where we're going next. Like, this is what we want to do next. We still have to have the image, the North Star of where we're going.
And that's what we're going to continue to talk about in this series on courage, which is how do we take our leadership superpowers to the testing point? How do we pass the test, basically, when we take them to a testing point? Like we said, Brian, that test might be small and that test might be large, but really what we always talk about here on WonderTour is that if you ever want to pass a large test, you've got to be able to pass the small tests along the way. You've got to learn from when you fail the small tests so that you can slowly build yourself up to be that magnanimous leader who is able to be more and more like, for example, Batman.
Yeah, that's what we talk when we talk about the leader's character being intact, is the leader making decisions that are consistent from the high level to the small level, and the leader being able to refer to principles, being able to refer to narrative, being able to refer to rely on the courage at any of those levels.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's all for this week. We'll hope you'll join us again next time. We'll continue our series on courage, but in the meantime, just remember, as always, character is destiny. And character can be cultivated.